If you can, then I will be the first to burn my books. Your Majesty, I put myself in your hands. Please do not let my enemies make you angry at me without a good reason. All right, sounds like a nice response. And the Eck, who's the person again sent by Rome, and Prince Charles and some others go out of the room. They talk about it and they said, "You can't let it stand like that." He didn't give a clear answer. Let's go back and say, give us a clear, direct answer. Will you recant these things? So they go back in and they said, you need to give us a clear answer. No wishy-washy, no long answer. Do you or won't, or will you recant or not? And here's Luther's response. Since your Majesty and your Lordships want a simple, clear, and true answer, I will give it. Unless I am convinced by the teachings of Holy Scripture or by sound reasoning, for I do not believe either the Pope or councils alone, since they have often made mistakes and have even said the exact opposite about the same point. I am tied by the Scriptures I have quoted and by my conscience. I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither safe nor right. God help me. Amen. And at that point, chaos broke out in the room, and Luther left. It was not the end. Luther then leaves, and Charles does not make an immediate decision on Luther being an outlaw. Luther leaves. A month after Luther spoke to the Diet, Charles gives the edict condemning him to death. All right? So a month, he gives that edict, or he gives that statement, and then Charles takes a month to make the decision, and then he gives the edict saying Luther is to be killed. He's an outlaw. And again, this happens in 1519. So Luther doesn't die for 30 years after this, basically. Luther, on his way back from Worms, was kidnapped. How many of you have heard that part of the story? Okay. All right, he's kidnapped, and he's taken to the Wartburg Castle, where he'll stay for 10 months. He's kidnapped by supporters of Frederick the Wise. Okay. Frederick the Wise sets it up, but doesn't want to know any of the details, so that when he would be asked, he could honestly say, I don't know where Luther is. So these guys take him, and they take him to the Wartburg Castle. Wartburg Castle is one of the things we'll see. And while Luther is there, he will accomplish one of the great acts for Germans. He will translate the Bible the New Testament from the Greek into German language. That before this was non-existent, because there were dialects, and Luther's translation of the German Bible, or of the German New Testament, is what really unifies the language, and is still what Luther is given prominence for in Germany, I think, more than almost anything else. Is that true, Anna?
Absolutely.
So, all right, so he'll be there for 10 months. In that time period, almost no one knows who he is. He's incognito, and among other things, he will grow a beard, and he'll be known as Knight George. And Knight George will send numerous letters here, there, and everywhere, but, and in fact, when things get bad, which they will be in about 10 months, things are starting to go rotten in Wittenberg, because Karlstadt, who was one of Luther's followers, and some others, started making some bad decisions. And Luther says, I can't stay, I've got to get back. On his way back, he goes incognito. He travels as Knight George, and he runs into some people, and everybody's trying to guess who he is. Nobody knows for sure, and Knight George shows up back in Wittenberg, and then he becomes Luther again.
I was just thinking that, I don't know if this ever come up in courses I've taken, but that he must have stayed away from his family, relatives, parents, if they're still living at the time, because they, the political forces could put pressure on them to find out where he's at.
He didn't have his family yet.
Like that.
This was before he married.
I knew that, but I mean, like his parents,
Yeah.
brothers and sisters.
I'm trying to remember when he gets word about his father's death, and I can't remember if it's during this time period or if it's later. But Luther was struck hard when we got word about his father's death. But yeah, he had no connection,
Probably could.
clearly with who he was or where he was at. Everything was pretty hidden as he hides out in the worker, which is very close to where his family was at. Okay, peasant revolts had occurred in 1502, 1514, and 1515. Again, the Reformation, the 95 Theses are nailed to the door in 1517. All right, so just 2 years after. These peasant revolts were pretty severe. I mean, it was a lot of people losing their lives in order to put the peasant revolts down. What are they revolting over? Poor conditions. Because they're living many times without enough food. They're, similar to what we would know kind of as the old, system with the castles and the knights and all that kind of stuff. Well, they're the people who don't own property and can't keep what they raise because it belongs to the landowner, and the landowner might give them back enough for them to survive, but if it's not a real good year, then the landowner takes it all and they get almost nothing, and they can't go and hunt in the forest because the forest belongs to the king, and so the peasants revolt, and their revolts are put down because they're not organized and they don't have great equipment and all those things. But all of that is a key piece. Again, 1517, the Reformation occurs right after two of these revolts happen almost back to back, and now they're hearing about freedom and Luther, and we have this and we have that. So there was Luther. Freedom of the Christian should be Christian will, I think, led to the conflict. Luther found fault on both sides. This new peasant revolt, or peasants' war, breaks out. I forgot to write down what year this happens. Dick, do you remember?
No, I couldn't help on that one.
I think it's like 1524. All right, so the Reformation's about 7 years old. It's in that range, I can find out. Anyway, Luther looks at both sides and he says both sides have done some wrong things. And he writes against the peasants, and he writes against the princes, and he writes to them both, and trying to bring about a peaceful resolution, which doesn't end up happening. Then finally Luther takes a stand and stands with the princes, and at that point he lost a lot of his support among the peasants. Because the peasant war that breaks out is put down harshly. The princes really come down, and there are many, many thousands of peasants who lose their lives in the peasant war of this time period. And that's another piece that, somehow you have to put in Luther's, cauldron of stuff. All right. Because of the on-again, off-again war between Charles and Francis, Lutheran princes and churches had opportunity to establish and grow. Charles and Francis, they'd have this war, then they'd kind of resolve it for a little bit, and then all of a sudden the war would be going on again. Consequently, as I talked about earlier, Charles is always trying to keep the princes on his side, and because of that, he's back in Spain directing the army in the war, and he's not in Germany. So the German princes are free to do what they want to do. And as they're doing what they want to do, about half of them are going with Luther. And about half of them are going with the Roman Catholic Church. And the ones that are going with Luther are letting Lutheran pastors continue to do the things they're doing, and their Lutheran churches are growing. Then finally, Francis and Charles come to an agreement, and now Charles will begin to focus back on Germany. But by then, the Lutheran princes have got a lot of support and are very Lutheran in what they're doing. So in 1529, Charles holds a Diet of Speyer. All right, the names of the places are where they're at, but this diet is now where they're going to say, okay, let's get together and try to come to some resolution about, are we Lutheran, are we Catholic, and what does all this mean? That doesn't reach any resolution, so in 1530 he calls another diet, this diet at Augsburg. And what he's going to do now is he recognizes the Lutherans have enough of power, I can't just beat them down. So he's inviting them to come and meet with the Catholic side and let's have some conversation. And initially it sounds like a very, let's all meet at the table and talk about these things. Unfortunately, what they find out is it wasn't supposed to really be that way. But the Lutherans come prepared. And they're on the way, and Luther's with them, and then they say, Luther, you can't go any further. You can't go to Augsburg. Again, Augsburg's in the very southern part of Germany. That's in the Roman Catholic area. And if you go there, your life's gone. So Luther, you have to stay behind. And now the others, including Melanchthon, who's a significant professor and friend of Martin Luther, we talked about last week. Melanchthon goes along, and Melanchthon now is writing a "What do we believe?" that will be presented to the Catholic scholars who will be at the Diet of Augsburg. And that is called the Augsburg Confession. The Augsburg Confession, what do we confess that we believe? And the Augsburg Confession is in this volume called the Book of Concord. All right? Trying to say, what is it that will bring us together? And the first document in it is the Augsburg Confession. Now, the Catholics hear this confession, and they actually, it took multiple days before they finally would even let them present it. You know, Charles didn't want to hear, and the Catholic scholars didn't want to hear, and the Lutherans kept pushing and kept pushing. They finally let them present it. And then the Catholics take a number of days, and then they finally respond, but they wouldn't give a copy of their response to the Lutherans. So then the Lutherans had to try to remember what they had said was wrong with what they had presented. And then that is the next document in there, and it's called the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, which doesn't mean why we're saying we're sorry, but it means the defense. So the Apology of the Augsburg Confession comes next. And then, that comes later. Then they finally realize we're not going to come to agreement, and everybody goes their own way. Charles, again, trying to force the Lutherans to come to his way of thinking, recognizes it's not going to work very well. But the Lutherans also realize, hey, we can't stand separate. So they form a league of Schmalkalden, which is, again, a small place where they all gather together. These princes get together and they say, let's form a league, basically a NATO alliance, where if you're attacked, I'll come to your rescue. If I'm attacked, you'll come to my rescue. And now the League of Schmalkalden says, we, the Lutheran princes, will stand together against Charles if he comes after us because we're not going back to the Roman Catholic way of doing things. That's formed in 1531. Now, a number of years later, this same league, which continues to hold Charles at bay because he recognizes they really mean it. In fact, he shows up at try to remember. He showed up at Augsburg. Charles shows up at Augsburg, and the Lutherans are already there, and they're worshiping. And they're worshiping in the Lutheran way. And he got angry and wanted them to stop. And the one prince got down on his knees and said, you may kill me, but you may not stop my worship of God the way I know it to be true. And Charles is just appalled and says, no, I will not kill you. So he recognizes these people take their faith very, very seriously. And the League of Schmalkalden stands firm with each other that we believe this to be the right way of being. And in fact, I guess I should kind of give it to you. I'm going to go a little long, but I promise it won't be too much longer. The Augsburg Confession. Starts out, most serene, most mighty, invincible Emperor, most gracious Lord. And then, so now you would know who that is. It's Charles that they were writing this to. And then at the end of it, After the end, we have now reviewed the chief articles as they were regarded as controversial, though more abuses can be mentioned. It goes on from there. In keeping with the summons, we have desired to present the above articles as a declaration of our confession and the teaching of our preachers. If anyone should consider that it is lacking in some respect, we are ready to present further information on the basis of the divine Holy Scripture. Your Imperial Majesty's most obedient servants, John, Duke of Saxony, Elector, George, Margrave of Brandenburg, Ernest, Duke of Lunenburg, Philip, Landgrave of Hesse, John Frederick, Duke of Saxony, Francis, you get the idea? This is not being signed by theologians. This is being signed by the princes of Germany who say, we stand for this. And that's, again, a key piece in what's going on here. So the League of Schmalkalden becomes this powerhouse, and at the end of Martin Luther's life, he's recognizing he's going toward the end of his life, and he says, there's one last thing I need to do, because Melanchthon wrote the Augsburg Confession and the Apology. Luther wasn't even there. Luther now will write his statement that kind of goes along with this, and it's called the Schmalkald Articles, which is in here as well. So the Book of Concord are the statements of belief that are presented to the Catholics by by Melanchthon and then by Luther, and then there's another one that comes after that we won't worry about. All right, so I've covered Luther. What we're going to do next week is cover Germany and geography and some common expressions and try to answer any questions you might have. Just a couple of things. Reminder, if you haven't already given me a check or cash, $21 per person. If you're doing check, please make it out to Faith Lutheran Church. The Lyle Hagemeyer Retirement Fund is not to be funded by this. And then if you can get it to me, no later than next Tuesday, I want to try to get it all converted into euros before we leave, so that I'll be able to give that to our tour guide and bus driver. Obviously, Sharon's not here tonight, so we can't get any answers about the transfer. She was going to talk to Ken about transferring dollars to euros, so I don't know anything more on that. So if you see her or if you want to talk to her, recall that last week she said Ken can convert those at no cost, since he works for which bank?
ESL.
ESL. Okay. All right. Anything else you want to ask about? Please.
Just curious, while you're talking, if you had read or studied about the other Protestant leaders during that time that he had to deal with too, like Zwingli and Calvin, some of those. He was really busy on all fronts.
And yeah, I had to compress and leave out some things, but yeah, he met with Zwingli, which was a key piece in that time period. Zwingli was doing his work in Switzerland at about the exact same time as Luther was in Germany. They got together, they had some very good discussions, they got very upset and angry with each other, and then they both apologized to each other, and they finally said, you know what, we're going to both disagree on some key pieces that will keep us separate. Had they not had that separation, it's a very different kind of place that would end up being. I should give you just one last bit of information about the Schmalkalden League. They wrote a response later on. It's very brief, but it's, I think, a key piece. Give it to you fast. Here's what they wrote, the Lutheran princes. We protest before God and before men that we and our people will not agree to anything in this decree that is contrary to God, to His holy word, to our right conscience, and to the salvation of our souls. The word protest there is meaning that we tell what we believe. That statement that starts with we protest before God and before men leads to a term that we use yet today. Protestants. The Protestant church, or Protestant churches, come because of that statement. Saying, and again, they were all the Lutherans at that point, we protest about the statement of the Catholics saying that we're, doing these things wrong. Saying, no, we're about God's word. So I wanted to give that to you. All right, please, John.
Luther comes out of his 10 months of being kidnapped. He becomes public again. Isn't there a price on his head? How does he survive?
The people of Wittenberg loved Luther so much that they would not allow any, it's not like you can jump on a plane and get out of town. If you killed Luther, you're giving your own life up. And nobody was willing to die in order to kill Luther. Because people in Wittenberg, there truly would have been a riot had Luther been killed.
But to this day, I believe that Martin Luther is still considered an outlaw to the Catholic Church, excommunicated, I believe.
They have never revoked the excommunication or the papal bull.
Right.
Okay, we're done.
Thank
you.
You're very welcome. Sorry I had to address so much.
When I told my Catholic
You printed that one for a while, I know you saw it.
and they go to mass every Sunday.
He shows that one too.
500 anniversary Reformation next year.
That's how you do
So I
it.
said, you probably heard about Martin Luther. She said,